Welcome back to part 2. But what made Robert gulp was a pair of silver mirrors sewn into the raw sockets of the man's eyes. Scars emanated from them, crisscrossing his cheeks and running up under the brim of his hat. "Who are you?" the man demanded, peering down a vein blistered nose, until Robert's face appeared reflected in his mirrored eyes. Robert's word drained in his throat. He took a deep breath. "I live here, sir," he finally managed to wheeze. "My colleagues asked if you'd seen anything unusual go past." The mutton chop man scratched at his eye socket, perilously close to the mirrored right eye. "What kind of thing?" Robert asked, his voice a strangled whisper. "A fox?" The mutton man pressed his thick lips together tightly. It seemed as if he was about to reveal something more, but then decided against it. "Never mind," he jabbed a podgy finger at Robert. "Get back to your house." "I saw your fox run that way," Robert blurted, pointing down the street that led out of town. "You're certain?" The mutton chop man's mirrored betrayed nothing, but he didn't seem convinced. He glanced down at the dog straining on its leash, pulling towards the alley. "Oh yes," Robert answered. "I watched it from my window." "Which window?" "One over there." He waved at a row of shops on the other side of the village, keeping it vague in case the men were thinking of returning. The mutton chop man nodded. "Thanks, Ad. We'll be getting along and you should go. A young boy like you ought to be out on a cold November morning when the weather's dangers are about." He turned to go and the others and the dog followed. Robert dawdled on his way, watching them, making sure they took the path he suggested. They hurried through the village, but when they reached the last house on the left, they stopped, confused. The dog seemed to have lost its scent and wandered around aimlessly, trying to pick it up. For a moment it seemed they would come back, but then the animal pulled them onwards. When they passed the last fence of the village, a black steam wagon appeared at the edge of the woods, smoke puffing from its chimney stack. The mutton chop man pointed towards it, giving instructions, and the group split, the other 4 men making off down the road with their dog while he walked back into town. Robert decided to make himself scarce. He'd go and look for the fox later when the mutton-chopped fellow was gone. Besides, he had chores to do before opening time, better to get on. As he trudged back to the clockmaker's shop, the low morning sun shone against its footage, burning off the last of the mist and making the clocks in the windows gleam. Robert's family had owned Townsend horologists for the first 5 generations. Its plain facade and classic sign did nothing to suggest the shrine of the timepieces inside. Carriage clocks, pendulum clocks, cuckoo clocks and barometers covered every inch of the wall, and at the back stood an old grandfather clock with a gold pendulum, which had once belonged to Robert's grandfather, front and centre with a panelled counter with a heavy silver till behind which Robert spent most of his days. When the sun shone as it did this morning, the glass-covered clocks threw patterns of light around the walls, and every day, irrespective of weather, they filled the shop with their ticking, their different timbres, giving the place a percussion music all of its own. Robert's star, Thaddeus Townsend, moved in to time with his beat while he worked, a short man with delicate features. His watery blue eyes were enlarged by the thick magnifying glasses he wore to adjust the timepieces. People came to Thaddeus with all kinds of old repairs, not only watches and clocks, but other devices too, barometers, chronometers, musical snuff boxes, sometimes even simple mechanicals, and Thaddeus would take these things apart and attempt to fix them. If a machine intrigued him, he often took on the work for a cost, a skilled mechanist, an engraver, and a dab hand at touching up miniatures. He enjoyed telling people how there was as much art in clockworks as in a beautiful sculpture or a painting. His customers liked him because he cared. They came from all over the country to take advantage of his abilities and never paid what the labour was worth. His Tsar had so much talent. Robert wished he'd shut up shop and move them somewhere where people would pay fairly for their work, or he'd have dearly loved it if they could fix engines at the air station or restore old mechanimals, but Thaddeus preferred the quiet life of Townsend's horologists. As things stood, Robert felt destined to be a clockmaker's apprentice forever, which was a shame because he was simply no good at it. A bumbler. His thumbs and fingers, that was how he thought of himself. He was 13 now, and no matter how hard he worked, He could never manage the delicacy required for repairing the miniature mechanisms or for dealing with customers, come to that. It hadn't always been so. As a child, he'd been quite an enthusiastic pupil, nimble and quick, always wanting to learn things, but in recent years he'd found he'd grown clumsy, constantly misplacing tools or dropping important cogs down the cracks in the floorboards. This very morning, a mere hour before all the excitement with the men and the fox, he had broken a valuable carriage clock, overwound it while he was daydreaming about the Mechanomore and the airship, and when he looked up he found a clock's teeth had sheared into the barrel mechanism. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Thaddeus asked, for what, at Robert's count, was 113 times. "It's 7.5 turns, one wind in 7.5 turns. His dad never usually raised his voice, but he did on this occasion. "Now, I'll have to strip down the barrel and overhaul it. Why, the new parts alone will cost me more than my fee." "I'm sorry," Robert mumbled. "I must have miscounted." Thaddeus took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Few things in life are as fragile as a clockwork. "Robert, learn to be more careful."